Most women spend their lives trying to be chosen, polishing edges, softening voices, sacrificing selfhood in the hopes of approval. But some women do the opposite. They don't chase, they don't persuade, they don't mold themselves into palatable forms for a man's comfort. These women don't fit neatly into his expectations because they were never designed to. They unsettle him. They awaken what he has buried. They ignite what he has feared. And without lifting a single finger, they force him to face everything he has tried not to feel. These women don't need to be loud. In fact, they are often quiet, still, introspective. But there is a gravity to them, a kind of inner weight that disturbs the surface of a man's calm, controlled exterior. Her presence, like a myth he thought he'd forgotten, pulls on something ancient in his psyche, and he can't look away. It is not her beauty that disarms him, though she may be beautiful. It is not her sensuality, though she may be deeply sensual. What shakes him is the confrontation with his own unfinished work, his own shadow, his own fractured relationship with the feminine. Because when a man encounters a woman who is sovereign, who does not need his validation, his presence, or even his affection, he is brought face to face with the deepest ache in his own soul, his unloved parts, his suppressed emotion, the father who never listened, the mother who overpowered, the shame he wrapped in armor and called masculinity. She doesn't lecture him. She doesn't correct him. She simply exists in her power, her boundaries, her calm indifference to perform. And this alone is enough to undo him, because in her stillness he feels chaos. In her wholeness, he feels his lack. In her clarity, he sees the fog he's been hiding behind for years. This is not cruelty. This is initiation. And only the wounded masculine sees it as threat. You see, the wounded masculine is not just angry. He is terrified. Terrified of feeling too much, of losing control, of being seen beyond the masks he's built. He clings to domination, performance, certainty, because vulnerability, to him, feels like death. But this woman, this quietly powerful force of nature, makes vulnerability inevitable. She does not force him to soften. She simply does not entertain his hardness. She does not chase. She does not explain. She does not prove. She does not twist herself into the shape of his comfort zone. She simply is. And in being, she becomes the mirror, the kind of mirror that no man can escape, not because she wants to hurt him, but because her essence reflects what he has long refused to claim within himself. In Jungian terms, she embodies the anima, the soul image of woman within the male unconscious. She stirs in him the original blueprint of connection, of emotion, of merging. But if he is unprepared, unhealed, or uninitiated, this encounter will feel like spiritual violence. Because the anima, when projected onto an actual woman, becomes distorted by his own psychological wounds. What should feel like union becomes obsession. What should feel like growth becomes fear. What should feel like inspiration becomes possession. He will either grow or he will flee. He may try to dominate her, shame her, seduce her, silence her. But she is beyond capture. Not because she is evasive, but because she has already married her own soul. She has done her shadow work. She has sat in silence with her wounds. She has danced in her darkness without asking for rescue. She has burned the lies that kept her small. And now she simply does not negotiate her light for approval. This is what awakens him. Not her words, but her being. Not her love, but her refusal to abandon herself. Not her softness, but her refusal to collapse for him. The woman who awakens the wounded masculine does not do so through force or strategy or manipulation. She awakens him by being the embodiment of everything he has lost within himself. She becomes, in essence, the key he didn't know he was searching for. And yet, the lock must be ready. His soul must ache enough. His ego must crack open. The projection must shatter. And that shattering often begins with her silence, with the moment she stops trying to be understood, with the moment she stops making herself digestible, with the moment she turns inward and lives as if his recognition was never needed in the first place. Because that is when he sees it, not her, but himself, and the parts of him he spent a lifetime hiding. What he sees in that moment, what truly haunts him, is not just the woman. It is the reflection of his unlived life, his abandoned emotions, his silenced inner child, the dormant soul he wrapped in logic and called strength. She doesn't call him out, she calls him in. And for the man still ruled by the wounded masculine, that invitation feels like terror wearing the mask of beauty. He may dream of her for years, not because she gave him fireworks, but because she gave him silence. Because she didn't demand his time, his promises, his future. She demanded his presence. And presence, for the man addicted to distraction, is unbearable. To be present is to feel, and to feel is to remember. To remember the places within that never learned how to love without needing to conquer. This is where obsession is born, not in lust, but in emotional awakening. The kind that comes without warning, like a whisper through the bones. A woman who holds herself with sacred indifference, who expects nothing, explains nothing, and simply walks in her own knowing, is not easily forgotten. Because she did not perform to win him. She did not suffer to earn him. She did not shrink to soothe him. She stood quietly, fully, with a gaze that says, I have nothing to prove and nothing to protect. And it is that gaze, calm, detached, almost cruel in its clarity, that pierces through the illusions of his ego. It unsettles him because it does not beg. It does not chase. It does not even react. It sees. And in being seen, he feels naked, not in body, but in soul. Because the woman who has done her inner work sees beyond charm, beyond words, beyond roles. She sees the boy beneath the man, the mask beneath the smile, the longing beneath the bravado. And perhaps for the first time in his life, he realizes she does not want to fix him. She will not mother him. She will not tolerate his avoidance, nor excuse his violence, nor wait for him to choose her when he's ready. Because she already chose herself. The wounded masculine cannot own a woman like this. He can only become worthy of her. And that terrifies him. In the stillness of her boundaries, he encounters a choice: evolve or retreat. Begin the terrifying descent into his own shadow, or resent her for being the storm that cracked his armor. Many choose the latter. Many turn away, finding safer women, more compliant, more malleable, more willing to build their lives around his comfort. But even in those new arms, he'll think of her. The one who never asked to be remembered. The one who did not bend. She is not hard to love. She simply refuses to be loved poorly. She does not confuse attention with devotion. She does not crave validation from the emotionally unavailable. She would rather walk alone than entertain a half-present man. And it is in this unshakable solitude that her power multiplies. She is not cold. She is clear. She is not distant. She is sovereign. And that sovereignty, that inner throne, is what sets her apart from every other woman he has met. This is what awakens the masculine. Not seduction, not submission, but the impossible intimacy of being in the presence of a woman who no longer performs. And yet, this is also where many men falter, because to love a woman like this requires death. Death of ego, death of control, death of every strategy used to avoid vulnerability, and in the place of death, rebirth. The conscious masculine, the integrated man, the one who no longer fears feeling, but she will not walk him there. She will not drag him toward his healing. She will not beg him to rise. Her silence is the map. Her distance is the invitation. Her absence is the lesson. Because the woman who has learned to sit with her own pain no longer entertains a man who runs from his. She doesn't argue. She doesn't prove her value. She doesn't try to be understood. She knows that if a man cannot meet her where she stands, it is not her job to kneel. And in that knowing, she becomes unforgettable. Not because she played a game, but because she didn't. Not because she needed him, but because she didn't need anything from him that she hadn't already given herself. And so she becomes a myth in his mind. Not the kind sung by sirens or etched in romantic fantasy, but the kind carved into the soul by silence, by the weight of a gaze that saw through him and didn't flinch. He may not even fully understand what happened. He'll say she was too much, too complicated, too independent. But deep down, beneath the layers of justification and blame, he knows the truth. She was simply too real for the persona he had been performing. The wounded masculine doesn't hate her. Not really. He hates what she reveals, that the armor he's worn all his life is not strength. It's fear dressed as dominance. He hates that she didn't need saving, that she didn't make his validation her oxygen, that she was whole in ways he didn't even know were possible. And so he'll oscillate between longing and rage, between idealizing her and resenting her. He will try to replace her, replicate her, forget her. But how do you forget the woman who forced you to see your own soul? You don't. You bury her in layers of distraction, in louder relationships, in addictions dressed as ambition, in hollow victories. But even in the arms of a woman who bends and pleases and molds herself to your needs, a part of you will ache because you know none of it is real. None of it touches the part of you she reached. And for the woman, there is grief too. Not for the man himself, but for what he could have become. She doesn't walk away unscathed. She walks away knowing that some men would rather stay in pain than rise into power, that some men would rather keep their armor than feel the ecstasy of true intimacy. And so she grieves, not the loss of him, but the loss of potential, the death of what might have been. But she does not return. That is the difference. She does not beg or wait or water herself down in hopes of being more digestible. She knows that her light is not for the unready, that her depth is not meant for the shallow, that her sacred rage, her ancient wisdom, her unapologetic power will not fit into the hands of a man who fears his own heart. This is the woman who awakens the wounded masculine. She is not a fantasy. She is not a strategy. She is not a dream to be chased or a role to be fulfilled. She is the mirror of his soul, and in her presence, he either awakens or turns away. She does not mourn those who choose the latter. She does not apologize for their discomfort. Because she has spent years walking through her own fire, years shedding the skin of who she was taught to be, she has knelt before the altar of loneliness. She has danced with her own darkness. She has mothered the parts of herself no man ever could. And she knows her love is not a transaction. It is a revelation, and that kind of love demands maturity. Not the performance of masculinity, but the embodiment of it. It demands a man who is not intimidated by power, but inspired by it, who does not seek to control her flame, but to warm himself by it, who does not reduce her to roles, girlfriend, wife, muse, but meets her as an equal, soul to soul, without the need to dominate or disappear. And until such a man arrives, she is content in her solitude. Because her solitude is not empty, it is rich with meaning, with poetry, with purpose. She has stopped filling her time with distractions. She has stopped searching for worth in the eyes of others. She has stopped offering her softness to those who mistake it for weakness. Her solitude is her sanctuary. Her silence is her strength. Her standards are her shield. And if you find yourself haunted by her, good. If her absence burns more than her presence ever did, good. That's the point. She didn't come to be understood. She came to awaken you. An awakening is never comfortable. It is never soft. It is not a lullaby. It is a siren call, a psychological storm, a spiritual reckoning. But if you let it break you open, if you dare to face what she has shown you, you may finally meet the man you were always meant to become. But to meet that man, you must be willing to die, not in body, but in identity. The wounded masculine is not just a product of childhood or trauma. He is the echo of a culture that taught men to fear their own depths, to confuse silence with weakness, to replace vulnerability with aggression, to avoid love unless it could be owned or dominated. A culture that whispered, "You are only as worthy as what you control," and called it manhood. And so men armored up. They built empires on emptiness. They chased women not to connect, but to conquer. They avoided their grief by collecting attention, hiding their ache behind careers, cars, currencies. But underneath the applause, many are starving. Starving for something real. Starving for the kind of woman who doesn't need them, but sees them. Not as providers or protectors or performers, but as souls. And when that woman arrives, eyes unwavering, spirit unbending, they feel it. The call to drop the act. The call to dismantle the persona. The call to become not just a man, but whole. This is the gift she brings, and it does not come wrapped in sweetness. It comes wrapped in sacred discomfort. Because she doesn't fall into his life. She interrupts it. She interrupts his patterns, his coping mechanisms, his belief that love must be earned through suffering or status. She does not respond to manipulation. She does not engage with power plays. She is unmoved by charm, by promises, by performative kindness, because she doesn't want performance. She wants presence. And for the man still operating from the wounded masculine, that requirement is devastating. Presence means surrender. Presence means letting go of the need to win. Presence means feeling all the things he's worked so hard not to feel. Shame, sadness, inadequacy, fear. She doesn't offer a script. She offers a mirror. And that mirror reflects everything, his unhealed pain, his false selves, his buried brilliance. If he's brave, he'll look. If he's ready, he'll begin. But if not, he'll run. and blame her for the fire she didn't start but merely revealed. She knows this pattern well. She's lived it in many forms. The man who adored her intensity until it asked him to feel. The man who praised her independence until he could not control her. The man who called her magic until he realized it wasn't for sale. And every time she is met with fear, instead of reverence, she retreats deeper into herself. Not in bitterness, but in clarity. She learns again that not every man deserves access to her depth, that not every man is ready for the kind of love that doesn't flatter the ego, but frees the soul. She becomes rarer, not because she tries to be, but because she refuses to be anything less than herself. And the man who remembers her, truly remembers her, does so not because she gave him what he wanted, but because she reminded him of what he lacked. She is the pulse of what he abandoned, the whisper in his bones that says you were made for more than this. And maybe, just maybe, that whisper will become a voice. Maybe he'll tire of the games, the women who submit without power, the victories that feel hollow. Maybe one day, he'll choose depth over distraction, consciousness over control, love over ego. And when he does, he may seek her again. But she will not be waiting. Because the woman who awakens the wounded masculine does not pause her life for a man still battling his own reflection. She does not dim her light to guide him home. She holds her fire and walks forward, trusting that if he is meant to rise, he will. Not for her, but for himself. Because she is not the reward. She is the catalyst. Not the destination, but the storm that clears the path. Not the muse, but the mirror. And if he ever becomes ready, truly ready, he will not return to possess her. He will return to meet her. As a man who has faced himself, as a man who no longer runs from love disguised as power, as a man who understands her depth was never meant to drown him, it was meant to awaken him. And so the story shifts, no longer about the man chasing the elusive woman, nor about the woman shrinking herself to be loved. It becomes something far more sacred, a reckoning between two souls, stripped of illusion, between the woman who has already walked through fire and learned to feed herself on silence, and the man who dares finally to step into the same flame, not to be burned, but to be born. The awakened masculine is not louder than the wounded one. He is quieter, still, rooted not in dominance, but in devotion, not the devotion of worshiping her, but of remaining faithful to truth, even when it costs him comfort. This man has met his shadow, not just once, but again and again. He has seen his rage, his jealousy, his fear of inadequacy, and he did not project it outward. He held it, without running, without punishing, without needing to make anyone else small so that he could feel tall. And when he meets her again, not by accident, but by alignment, it is different. She does not soften at his arrival. She does not leap into his arms with the hunger of old wounds longing for closure. She simply watches, eyes still calm, body still sovereign, energy unchanged. Because she knows, only time reveals whether a man has truly awakened or simply learned new words for the same avoidance. This time, there are no games, no roles, no proving. He does not try to own her. He honors her. He does not interrupt her silence with promises. He meets it with presence. He does not seduce her into submission. He stands beside her in stillness. And it is this non-performance, that moves her. Not because she needs saving, but because she has waited lifetimes to be met without needing to shrink, without needing to teach, without needing to warn or plead or walk away again. She doesn't smile easily. She doesn't fall easily, not because she is bitter, but because she is discerning, because she knows that the heart is not a theater, and she will not audition for a role in someone else's story. But if she sees that he has truly returned, not as the echo of a wounded boy, but as the embodiment of a healed man, she will not resist what flows between them. She doesn't need him, but she may choose him. Not out of loneliness, out of recognition. And that is the power she carries. The ability to love with depth, without dependency. To offer herself fully, but never forget who she is when she is alone. To remain connected to soul, even in union. It is a love that does not cling. It does not control. It does not dissolve the self. It strengthens it. This is the love that few ever reach, because it requires two people who have faced their own mirrors, two people who have sat in the dark long enough to stop fearing it, two people who no longer seek completion in another because they have already found it within. And when such people meet, it is not chaos, it is calm. It is not a fire that consumes, but a warmth that endures. Not a possession, but a communion. There are no threats, no ultimatums, no silent treatments, just truth. If she needs space, he respects it. If he feels pain, she listens. If fears arise, they are held, not weaponized. And slowly, gently, the old stories die. The stories of worth tied to attention. The stories of love as sacrifice. The stories of control masquerading as protection. The stories that say one must disappear for the other to feel safe. Those stories dissolve in the face of something real. Because real love does not ask for sacrifice, it asks for integration. The merging of feminine and masculine within each soul. The recognition that neither is superior. That both are essential. That one without the other is imbalance, and imbalance always ends in pain. The woman who awakens the wounded masculine is not just a woman. She is an archetype, a force that lives in every woman who has chosen her soul over her performance. And every man who meets her must decide, will he fight her reflection, or will he use it to finally see himself? Not every man will choose the latter, but those who do become kings. Not kings who rule over others, but kings who reign over themselves. And when such a king meets a woman who will not kneel, he does not demand her obedience. He offers her his hand, not to lead her, but to walk beside her, in power, in peace, in truth. And this is where the story ceases to be about wounding and becomes about witnessing. Not the performance of love, but its presence. Not the possession of a woman, but the protection of sacred space between two sovereign beings who no longer see love as conquest, but as co-creation. The woman who awakens the wounded masculine doesn't need to keep awakening him. That was never her purpose. She came as a storm, yes. As a mirror, yes. But not to stay and tend to his awakening like a nurse to a patient. She was the flash of insight, the mirror of truth, the spark in the darkened room. And from there, he must walk. If he has walked it, truly walked it, he returns no longer needing her fire to feel his own. He has tended it in silence. He has forged it in humility. He has allowed himself to fail, to fall, to feel, and still he rose. And now, when he stands before her again, there is no desperation in his gaze, only recognition. She, too, has evolved. She is no longer the woman who once reached into wounded men with open palms, hoping love might be enough. She no longer believes her empathy is a currency to be spent. She no longer carries the burden of awakening others. She is no longer magnetized to potential, but to presence. Her boundaries are not a fortress, they are a temple, and only the sacred may enter. So when they stand across from one another, two who have walked through fire and chosen wholeness, what they create is not a performance of polarity, but a field of resonance. Masculine and feminine, not in opposition, but in dance, in mutual honoring, in truth. There is still tension, but it is no longer rooted in fear. It is the tension of passion without attachment, desire without desperation, deep knowing without possession. She does not fall into him. He does not dissolve into her. They orbit one another like twin stars, each whole, each burning, each sovereign. He does not dim her light to shine. She does not shrink for his comfort. He is not threatened by her intuition, nor by her emotions, because he has met his own. He has wept in solitude. He has admitted where he was blind. He has asked forgiveness, not from her, but from himself, for all the years he ignored his truth. She does not test him, nor does she reward him. She meets him, fully, without armor, without defense. Not because she is naive, but because she is strong enough to be seen. She has nothing to prove and nothing to hide. And in that sacred meeting, something rare occurs. The old stories die. No longer does love mean power. No longer does attention mean control. No longer do either of them seek salvation in the other. They have already saved themselves. They are not half and half, trying to become whole. They are whole and whole, choosing to meet. And from that choice, something extraordinary is born. Not a relationship bound by fear, but a union rooted in truth. Not a constant cycle of wounds and repairs, but a field of safety where growth is celebrated, not punished. Where silence is allowed, where emotion is held, where passion is deep and communication deeper, where no one plays small to keep the other close. In this union, she is not too much. She is revered. In this union, he is not too emotional. He is honored. They speak from the soul, not the wound. They listen from the heart, not the ego. And what emerges is not fireworks, but a slow, steady fire that never dies. The woman who once awakened the wounded masculine no longer awakens him. He is awake. She no longer waits. He is present. She no longer carries. He holds his own. And as they walk forward, together or apart, they carry the same truth, that love is not rescue. It is reflection. It is not sacrifice. It is seeing and being seen. And if one day they part, not in fury, not in fear, but in knowing, they will still bow in gratitude for the storm, for the silence, for the awakening, for the holy labor of becoming whole. And from that wholeness, freedom. Because the woman who knows her worth doesn't chase, she chooses.